They all laughed when she inherited the old house. Her daughter called it a ruined mansion. Her cousin joked it should be condemned. Even the lawyer suggested selling it for land value. But what no one knew, that so-called ruined mansion was hiding a 100-meter discovery, buried in the basement, beneath dust and silence, was a forgotten invention, one that could change energy as we know it. It didn't just rewrite her family's story, it rewrote history. Before we dive in, if stories mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. At 58, Charlotte Whitmore wasn't expecting life to surprise her anymore. She lived alone in a cramped duplex just outside of Benton Hollow, a sleepy southern town whose biggest claim to fame was a gas station shaped like a cowboy hat. Her days were simple. Mornings with lukewarm coffee, afternoons flipping through job listings she was too overqualified or too old for, and evenings filled with reruns and silence. Her daughter, Isabel, called sometimes. Not often. Isabel had a life 3 states away, working in finance, raising 2 kids, married to a man who thought Charlotte was quaint at best. Charlotte didn't blame her. She'd done her best raising Isabel after her husband passed from a sudden heart attack. 2 jobs, night classes, no vacations. It was all for her daughter. And Isabel had made it college, career, city apartment with skyline views. Charlotte stayed behind, in a house that got colder every winter and quieter every year. Then came the letter, from a lawyer in Maine, of all places. Apparently, a distant great-aunt she'd met once at a funeral had passed away. No children, no spouse. And for reasons unknown, she'd left Charlotte the family's ancestral mansion in Eldridge Bay. The lawyer's words were clinical. You are the sole beneficiary of the Whitmore estate, including the property known as Havenmore Manor. Charlotte actually laughed. She thought it was a scam. Her family thought it was even funnier. A haunted shack in the woods, Isabel had said on speakerphone, laughing with her husband in the background. Mom, you couldn't maintain a garden shed. What are you going to do with a 19th century Gothic pile? Charlotte didn't argue. She wasn't sure what she was going to do either. But part of her, the part that remembered childhood stories of distant relatives with strange lives and hidden rooms, was curious. So, with a suitcase, a thermos of gas station coffee, and exactly $42 in her checking account, Charlotte drove 11 hours north into the fog and pine of the Maine coastline, to a place she'd never been, to claim a crumbling house she wasn't sure she even wanted. When she arrived, dusk was falling, and the road ended in gravel and silence. There it was, Havenmore Manor. 2 stories of stone and ivy and broken windows. The gates hung open like crooked arms. The shutters blinked like tired eyes. It didn't look haunted. It looked forgotten. Charlotte stood at the foot of the driveway, her breath fogging in the cold air, and whispered under her breath, "What the hell am I doing?" But something deep inside her stirred. She didn't know it yet, but what waited inside that ruined mansion would not only change everything she believed about her family, it would rewrite her life forever. Charlotte didn't sleep much that first night in Havenmore Manor. The old house groaned like it was remembering her. Each creak, each whisper of wind through cracked panes, felt like a voice from the past calling her name. She'd set up a makeshift bed in what might have once been the library, the only room with a wood-burning fireplace that still worked. The walls were lined with dusty books. The smell of old paper and ash wrapped around her like memory. She hadn't called Isabel to tell her she'd arrived. She didn't want to hear the concern in her daughter's voice disguised as sarcasm. She didn't want to feel small again. The morning after her arrival was gray and heavy. Fog rolled in from the bay like a secret trying to reach the shore. Charlotte made instant coffee in a dented thermos and walked the halls. She ran her hand along the banister of the grand staircase, its wood chipped and smooth from generations of hands before hers. This place had once mattered. She could feel it, in the craftsmanship, in the weight of silence. But now it was a husk, a ghost wearing a mansion's skin. Cobwebs hung like curtains, wallpaper peeled like old bandages, floorboards moaned under her feet. It would take a fortune to fix this place, and Charlotte had nothing but her hands and time. Still, something kept her moving forward. She explored room by room. A music room with a shattered piano, a dining hall with a chandelier hanging like frozen laughter, upstairs bedrooms with beds still made, like the past had only stepped out for a smoke. In one of the rooms, she found a photograph half buried in dust. It showed a woman elegant, sharp-eyed, standing beside a man in front of the very house Charlotte was now standing in, on the back, written in looping cursive Josephine and Elias, 1931. The engine of the future. Charlotte studied the photo. The woman looked familiar. There was something in the eyes, that quiet defiance, that held in sadness. She slipped it into her coat pocket without knowing why. Downstairs, behind the kitchen, she discovered a narrow stairway leading to the basement. The door groaned open, heavy with decades. The air turned colder, damp, earthy. She hesitated, then descended. What she found wasn't just a cellar, it was a workshop. The walls were lined with shelves stacked with blueprints, notebooks, strange tools she didn't recognize. There was a long table at the center, covered in dust and oil stains, and at the back of the room, partially hidden beneath an old tarp, was something mechanical. It looked like a generator, but not like any she'd ever seen. Copper coils wrapped with unnatural precision, steel housing engraved with delicate, hand-carved markings, gauges and dials labeled in old, faded ink. There was a nameplate, half-rusted, bolted onto the base. Whitmore Resonance Engine, Prototype B. Charlotte stepped closer, heart pounding. She had no idea what she was looking at, but she knew instinctively this was important. It didn't feel like junk. It felt like a secret. She spent hours in that basement, flipping through journals and schematics, some written in shorthand, others in full paragraphs filled with equations, diagrams, and phrases like magnetic inversion threshold and zero-loss transfer. It was like reading the diary of someone halfway between inventor and dreamer, someone who believed they could change the world. That night, Charlotte sat by the fire in the library with one of the journals open in her lap. She read an entry that stopped her cold. They say I'm mad, that no woman can understand the physics of resonance, but they'll see, one day, this engine will power cities. It will outlast wars, governments, and even time. I only hope someone finds this someone who doesn't laugh. The signature at the bottom, Josephine Whitmore. Charlotte held the book to her chest. They had laughed. Her family, the town, even her own daughter. They all thought she'd inherited a pile of rot and rats. But she was beginning to believe she'd inherited something far greater, a vision never realized, a dream buried in dust and disrepair. And in that moment, in the quiet flicker of firelight and old hopes, Charlotte decided she would stay. She would uncover everything Josephine had tried to build. And maybe she would finish what that forgotten woman had started. The days that followed blurred into one another, filled with cleaning, organizing, and a strange sense of purpose Charlotte hadn't felt in years. She didn't tell anyone what she'd found in the basement, not yet. Not because she was hiding it, but because she wasn't ready for the world to laugh again. She started small. She cleared out the kitchen, removed decades of grime and silence from the hallways, and swept broken glass from the drawing room where wind whispered through cracked stained glass windows. Each repaired hinge, each scrubbed floorboard made the mansion feel a little more like hers. Like maybe, just maybe, she belonged here. But the basement kept pulling her back. That strange engine, Josephine's resonance engine, felt like a magnet buried in steel. Charlotte didn't understand the science, not really, but she understood obsession. She'd lived long enough to know the difference between a pipe dream and a calling. And Josephine Whitmore had been called. Charlotte spent every night sitting at that basement table, translating the old notebooks into something legible. She watched tutorial videos online, messaged strangers in obscure forums under a fake name. She even checked out books on electromagnetic theory from the town library to the raised eyebrows of the teen librarian who clearly thought she was lost. Then came the storm. It hit on a Thursday evening, rolling in with a wall of black clouds and the kind of wind that makes trees bend like they're praying. Charlotte had just poured a cup of soup when the power went out. The silence was instant and suffocating. Only the wind and the pounding rain remained. She lit candles, found a blanket, and sat in the library, the fire already low. The house felt even more like a relic now cut off from time, untethered from the world. And then, a sound! A low hum. From the basement, Charlotte froze. The air around her felt charged like before a lightning strike. She grabbed a flashlight and made her way down the narrow stairs. The door creaked open, and the moment she stepped onto the concrete floor, she felt it. The engine was on. The gauges lit up faintly. The copper coils pulsed, glowing like embers. She hadn't touched it, hadn't even dared to. Yet here it was, alive. Panic gripped her for a second. Had she tripped something? Was this dangerous? But there was no heat, no smoke, no burning wires, only that steady, impossible hum. The journals had mentioned something about autonomous resonance ignition under extreme environmental conditions, but she had chalked it up to ambition, fantasy. Apparently, it wasn't. She stood there in the glow, breath caught in her chest, when the overhead bulbs, long dead since she'd arrived, flickered to life. The light wasn't strong. It was soft, golden, warm, but it was power. Power from this machine. Power from Josephine. Charlotte's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. No signal. Of course. The storm had knocked out the towers, but the battery icon was full somehow. She plugged in her dead laptop just to test. The light blinked green. It was charging. This engine wasn't just humming, it was working. Charlotte didn't sleep that night. She sat beside the machine, flipping through the journals with frantic awe. Josephine's final entries weren't about theories anymore. They were confessions. Please. They will take this from me. Or worse, they will ignore it. My brothers think I'm delusional. The estate is bleeding money, and they mock me over dinner. But I don't care. I've done something real. One day, someone will see it. They'll understand. Please, let someone believe. Charlotte wept. Not out of fear, out of recognition. Because she knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to have your dreams called silly, to sit at Thanksgiving while people joked about your life like it was some long, unfunny story. She stayed with the machine until sunrise. Then, she climbed upstairs, made coffee over the flame, and opened her laptop. It powered up instantly. And with shaking fingers, Charlotte typed a name into the search bar she hadn't spoken aloud in days. Josephine Whitmore. What she found wasn't much, a few obituaries, mentions in dusty engineering registries. One obscure article titled, The forgotten women of energy innovation. But there was one curious thing. A patent, filed in 1932. Resonant Electromagnetic Transfer System, J. Whitmore. Never approved. It had been challenged by a university just months later, cancelled, absorbed, forgotten. And the man who'd filed the successful patent after hers went on to become one of the most celebrated names in early energy research. His invention, strikingly similar to Josephine's, was now the foundation for a multi-billion-dollar energy conglomerate. Charlotte sat back. The air left her lungs. This wasn't just forgotten work. This was stolen genius. Her family hadn't just laughed at a mansion. They had inherited the grave of a woman whose brilliance had been buried alive. And Charlotte knew then, without a doubt, that she wasn't leaving this house. She was staying, and she was going to tell the world who Josephine Whitmore really was. Charlotte had never called herself brave. But standing there in that cold basement, surrounded by blueprints older than her, staring at a machine no one had touched in nearly a century, she felt something rise in her chest that didn't have a name. Maybe it was courage. Maybe it was Josephine. The engine still hummed quietly, as if it had been waiting this whole time. Charlotte knew she couldn't hide it anymore. She needed help, real help. Someone who understood this kind of thing. Someone who could confirm she wasn't chasing ghosts. So she did what felt impossible just a week ago. She made a phone call. Not to Isabel. Not yet. She called a name she had found buried in the footnotes of a 1978 engineering journal, Dr. Elias Munro, a retired physicist who once published a paper referencing early 20th century lost electromagnetic technologies. He picked up on the third ring. His voice was slow, deliberate. Dr. Munro, Charlotte began. I think I've found something you've been looking for your whole life. He didn't hang up. 2 days later, his dusty green Volvo pulled into the gravel drive of Havenmore Manor. He was in his 70s, stooped but sharp-eyed, with a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. He said little at first, only nodded as Charlotte led him through the creaking house and down the stairs into the basement. When he saw the engine, he stopped cold. "My God," he whispered. He approached the machine like a man approaching a long-lost friend. He examined it without touching, murmuring to himself, "The coils, the ratio's perfect. This shielding is not even theoretical anymore." And this he tapped the gauge. This shouldn't even exist in 1932. Charlotte watched him move from awe to silence, then back to awe. After nearly an hour of quiet study, he turned to her. "Do you have any idea what this is?" "I know who built it," Charlotte said softly. "Her name was Josephine Whitmore. She was mocked, ignored. Her patent was buried. Her brothers laughed her into silence. Dr. Munro nodded slowly, as if hearing a familiar tune. And now she asked, "What do I do?" He took a breath. "You document everything, every page, every schematic, every journal. I'll help you verify the physics. But Charlotte, this machine, if it works at scale, it's worth tens of millions, maybe more." He hesitated, then added, "One of the energy conglomerates built its empire on a patent I now suspect was stolen from Josephine. And if I'm right, this engine could be the original, the one that proves everything." Charlotte's heart stuttered. "Do you mean—" He met her eyes. "This could be worth $100 million. Silence fell heavy in the basement. But it wasn't shock that overtook Charlotte. It was grief. Not for the money, but for Josephine, a woman who had poured her brilliance into this invention, only to die forgotten in a house falling apart. A house that Charlotte now realized wasn't broken at all. It was buried treasure. That night, Charlotte sat by the fire in the library again, the warmth brushing her face while her thoughts swirled. Dr. Monroe was upstairs scanning documents, taking photographs, and preparing to reach out to a handful of trusted colleagues who might validate what they'd found. Charlotte held Josephine's final journal in her lap, fingers resting on the soft, worn leather. She opened to a page dated November 3rd, 1932. The patent was denied. Elias Whitmore filed a competing version 2 months later nearly identical to mine. I've been told to drop the matter, that it's unbecoming for a woman to argue with men of title and status. But I know what I built. I know what it can do. One day, someone will fight for me. Maybe not today. Maybe not this decade. But truth has a funny way of surviving. Even when people don't. Charlotte read the last line again, this time aloud. Truth survives. She stared into the fire, tears trailing silently down her cheeks. All her life, she'd been dismissed, laughed at, overlooked. A waitress, a clerk, a mother who'd given up everything and still somehow felt like a disappointment. But now she was the one uncovering a legacy the world tried to erase. She was no longer just Charlotte Whitmore. She was the voice Josephine never had. And she was going to be louder than history itself. By the end of the week, word had begun to leak. Monroe had contacted an old colleague, a retired patent examiner who owed him a favor. The man took one look at Josephine's documents, cross-referenced them with the patent filed under her brother's name, and responded with 2 words. It's theft. The original schematics, the resonance diagrams, the hand-drawn blueprints all dated months before Elias Whitmore's patent. Worse. Josephine's notes contained a signature equation, a specific efficiency ratio involving electromagnetic resonance that had only recently been replicated in modern labs. The only thing more stunning than the invention was the fact it had been ignored for 90 years. Monroe warned her gently, Charlotte, if this gets out, they won't just try to discredit her. They'll try to discredit you. But Charlotte had already made up her mind. She wasn't running. Not this time. She started with a call to Grace Ellington, a civil rights attorney who specialized in historical restitution. Grace had once represented the heirs of a black inventor whose early wireless transmission patents had been claimed by a corporation in the 1930s. She knew this terrain, the erasure, the legal battles, the tactics of delay and denial. Grace listened carefully as Charlotte laid everything out. When she finished, there was a long pause. And then Grace simply said, "I'm in." The next week moved like lightning. Grace assembled a legal team and began preparing a formal challenge to the original patent. Monroe provided scientific validation. Charlotte scanned every journal page, every schematic, every marginal note, uploading them into an encrypted archive Grace could share with historians, scientists, and future litigators. By Wednesday, Grace had made her first strategic move. She leaked the story. Not to a corporate outlet, but to the Forgotten Genius Project, an independent investigative site known for shining light on stolen legacies. The headline hit the internet like a match to dry brush. Buried in the basement, the woman who built a $100 million machine and was erased by her own family. Within 24 hours, it went viral. A woman in her late 50s inherits a crumbling mansion. Inside, she finds a 1930s device that could change the way power is generated. The original inventor, her great-aunt, had been buried in footnotes, while her brother became rich and famous. It was too unbelievable to ignore, and far too real to dismiss. Reporters called. Podcasts reached out. A national science magazine requested an exclusive. Even Isabel called. "Mom." Her voice was tight on the phone. "What's going on? I'm seeing your name all over my feed." Charlotte didn't say anything at first. Isabel continued. Softer now. "Why didn't you tell me?" Charlotte took a slow breath. "Because I knew you'd think I was crazy." A pause. "Maybe I would have..." Isabel admitted. "But I'm proud of you." Those words, 4 syllables. They landed in Charlotte's chest like a sunrise. 2 weeks later, Charlotte stood in the library at Havenmore, now cleaned and polished, facing a small camera crew from PBS. The walls were lined with Josephine's blueprints and photographs. The engine sat behind her, now fully restored. Wires tucked clean, gauges calibrated. Grace stood. Off camera, Dr. Monroe, in his tweed coat, adjusted his glasses. Even Isabel had flown in, sitting just out of frame. Watching her mother with tears in her eyes, Charlotte took a deep breath. "This," she began, gesturing towards the machine, "was built by Josephine Whitmore in 1932. She wasn't an engineer by title, but she was a genius in spirit, and like so many women of her time, she was laughed at, dismissed, and eventually erased." She turned to the camera. But her invention didn't die with her. It waited for decades, in the dark. And somehow, by grace or by fate, it found its way to me. Charlotte's voice broke slightly, just enough to feel real. "This isn't about me. It's about making sure the world finally says her name, loud enough for history to hear." The cameraman nodded gently. The light above the lens blinked red. The moment was captured. The next day, the front page of the Boston Globe featured the headline, "Justice for Josephine, the invention that could rewrite energy history." Phone calls came in from energy firms. Some wanted to partner, others threatened legal action. Grace was ready for all of it. But Charlotte wasn't afraid anymore. She had the truth. She had proof. She had a name, Josephine Whitmore, and she wasn't going to let the world forget it again. And for the first time in years, Charlotte felt something stronger than survival. She felt purpose. Fame, Charlotte quickly learned, was a double-edged sword. For every message of support, there was one filled with doubt. For every article praising Josephine's genius, there was a blogger accusing Charlotte of fraud. It's a publicity stunt. She forged those documents. She probably doesn't even understand how the machine works. Some even accused her of stealing the invention herself. She tried to ignore it. But then came the email unsigned, sent from an anonymous server. Josephine Whitmore was no genius. She was dangerous. Check the cellar wall, left side. You'll see the truth. Charlotte stared at the screen, heart pounding. Was it a hoax? A threat? Still, she couldn't ignore it. That night, flashlight in hand, Charlotte descended once more into the basement. The engine stood quiet, like a sleeping lion. She turned to the left wall, the one half covered in old shelving. She hesitated, then began pulling the shelves away. Behind them, she found something strange, a false panel, slightly ajar. Dust filtered into the air as she tugged it open, revealing a narrow space no wider than a closet. Inside a locked metal box, bolted to the ground. It looked deliberate, hidden. She pried it open with a crowbar. Inside were 3 sealed folders, each one marked in Josephine's sharp handwriting. And one more item, a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, written across the front for the one who finishes what I started. Charlotte's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter. "If you are reading this, then someone finally saw me. Thank you. But there is something you need to know. This engine, it works, but it is not without risk. In my final test, the prototype caused a fire. I lied to protect my research, to protect myself. No one was hurt, but the consequences were real. The machine can generate massive output far beyond what I predicted. If mishandled, it could be catastrophic. Please, continue, but with caution." Charlotte stared at the page, her pulse roaring in her ears. It changed everything. This wasn't just a lost invention. It was a dangerous one. She called Dr. Monroe at dawn. He arrived that afternoon, and together, they reviewed the newly uncovered documents. "It's more advanced than we thought," he said quietly. "The frequency patterns. They're unstable at full scale. Josephine may have stopped testing because she realized she couldn't control it." "So what do we do?" Charlotte asked. He looked at her, eyes clouded with conflict. "We pause. We verify. One wrong step, and this becomes something no one can defend." Charlotte agreed. But the media didn't. News of the secret compartment leaked by someone inside the legal team spread like wildfire. Headlines exploded. Explosive truth behind the 100-meters engine. Did Charlotte Whitmore hide critical safety risks? Was Josephine's invention too dangerous to share? Charlotte was crushed. But it was Isabel who took the hit harder. "You should have told me," she said, pacing the front porch. "You should have told everyone. Now they're painting you like some reckless old woman trying to go viral." Charlotte didn't respond at first. She just looked out at the field, the sun setting in bruised orange over the bay. "You think I wanted this?" she said finally, her voice cracking. "I was a waitress. I wanted peace. I wanted to matter for once, not be laughed at for trying to be more than what life handed me." "You do matter," Isabel said, tears shining in her eyes. "But this isn't just about Josephine anymore. It's about you. If something goes wrong..." Charlotte turned to her daughter. "Then I'll take the blame. Not her. Josephine deserved to be heard, not erased because someone got scared." Silence hung between them. "And then," Isabel said quietly, "then let me help. But we do it the right way. We bring in outside experts, third-party verification, transparency. We build trust, not headlines." Charlotte nodded. It wasn't surrender. It was growth. Over the next week, the farmhouse transformed into something between a lab and a museum. Engineers from MIT came to assess the engine. Safety specialists ran diagnostics. Charlotte opened every journal to scrutiny. She even invited reporters to film the process. She told the whole truth. The machine was powerful. It was also flawed. But most of all, it was real. And in the process, something unexpected happened. People stopped mocking. They started listening. They saw a woman not chasing fame, but honoring legacy. Not hiding danger, but inviting accountability. Not demanding credit, but fighting for justice. Josephine's name began trending again. But this time, so did Charlotte's. Not as a joke, not as a hoax, but as a woman who refused to be silenced, even when the story got messy. Even when it hurt. The ceremony was set for a Saturday. The invitation came on official letterhead from the National Institute of Technological Legacy, a place Charlotte hadn't known existed until 6 weeks ago. A special event to honor the pioneering contributions of Josephine Whitmore to modern energy theory. Her name not buried in a footnote, not stolen or replaced, but bold, centered, and finally, respected. Charlotte stood at the back of the small auditorium in Washington. D.C. Her hands wrapped tightly around the edges of the speech she wasn't sure she could finish. The room was filled with people she never imagined she'd meet: scientists, historians, lawmakers, even students. And in the front row sat Isabel. She wore a simple black dress and held a notepad in her lap. But she wasn't taking notes. She was watching her mother with the kind of gaze that said, "I see you now." The event began with a short film archival photographs of Josephine, narrated excerpts from her journals, black and white footage of the Whitmore estate. The crowd gasped when they saw the engine running for the first time, captured in recent footage with modern meters displaying numbers no one could argue with. Then came the words Charlotte never thought she'd hear. "It is with deep respect and overdue recognition that we posthumously award Josephine Whitmore the title of founding innovator in resonant energy conversion. A plaque was unveiled brass, etched in script, mounted on cherry wood. Josephine Whitmore, 1895–1948. A visionary lost to time. A legacy that powers the future. Charlotte's knees nearly buckled, not from nerves, from the sheer weight of justice delayed but not denied. They called her to the podium. She approached slowly, her heart pounding in her ears. The lights felt too bright, the crowd too quiet. But when she looked down at the speech in her hands, something inside her whispered. No script, just truth. She folded the paper and tucked it into her coat. Then she looked up. My name is Charlotte Whitmore. She began. Until a few months ago, I was nobody special. Just a woman trying to make ends meet. Trying to stay remembered by a world that moves too fast. A soft laugh rippled through the crowd, not mocking. Warm. But then I inherited a broken house and a broken story. She paused, and found a woman the world had forgotten. Charlotte's voice wavered, but she didn't stop. Josephine didn't build that machine for profit. She built it because she believed in possibility. She saw a future powered by something better, something cleaner, freer. She worked in the shadows, without permission, without applause. She died thinking she failed. Her eyes filled, but her voice held firm. But today, we say it together, she didn't. Applause thundered. Some stood. Others simply wiped their eyes. That night, Charlotte returned to Havenmore Manor, now registered as a historical landmark and newly funded by a grant to preserve Josephine's workshop. The lights were on, powered by Josephine's engine. She stepped into the basement, where it all began. The air was quiet now. The machine hummed gently, no longer a mystery, but a memorial living proof that one woman's mind could reach across a century and still light up the dark. She reached into the journal, her journal now, and flipped to the back page. She wrote, "You were right, Josephine." They laughed, but they're not laughing anymore. You were right to believe in this, in yourself, and somehow, in me. Your voice was never gone. It was just waiting for someone to listen. Charlotte closed the journal and placed it beside the engine. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel small. She didn't feel forgotten. She felt seen. Outside, Isabel waited on the porch with 2 mugs of tea. Charlotte joined her, and for a long while, they said nothing. Just watched the stars above the field. Josephine once walked. The field Charlotte had reclaimed. Mom, Isabel finally asked. Yeah. What now? Charlotte smiled softly. Now we teach others. We build. We honor people like Josephine. The ones who were told to sit down, stay quiet, who changed the world anyway. She took a sip of her tea. And maybe, she said, we show a few more daughters what happens when you stop apologizing for being brilliant. Isabel reached out, took her mother's hand. Neither of them spoke again. They didn't have to. The hum of the engine carried through the floorboards, steady and sure, like a heartbeat that had waited 90 years to be heard. Charlotte's story reminds us that truth can survive anything, even silence, even time, even betrayal. A forgotten woman in a dusty basement had created something the world wasn't ready for. But decades later, another woman, worn down by life and grief, found the courage to fight for her. It wasn't about money or fame. It was about dignity, justice, and the healing power of being seen. And that sometimes, when the world laughs, you keep going anyway. Because someone, somewhere, will be grateful you did. If this story moved you, hit subscribe. More untold stories are coming. Know someone chasing a second chance. Share this with them. Sometimes, One forgotten voice can change everything.